Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Greetings from Marrakesh, Morocco, and thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. I have been traveling around Morocco for the last week and a half or so, researching for a future tour here. Now, this is my first time in Morocco, and I am loving it. You know, truthfully, this hadn't really been on my own personal wish list as a destination to visit, but I have had so many people in my community asking me to run a tour here that I just couldn't ignore it. It just kept popping up so many times that I knew there had to be something to it, and I just had to come see it for myself. And it has definitely not disappointed. This is an amazing country. The Medinas, that's the old cities, these are filled with shops that sell everything from bread to copper lamps and shoes to souvenirs. And the cities are so beautiful. The mosques, the mosaic tile, the architecture, the gardens, it's all just been incredibly breathtaking. I'm actually just wrapping up my time here, but you can follow along by seeing photos of the trip on Facebook and just friend me there. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Wandergal. You know, for now, you can live vicariously through my photos, but you ladies out there, you can join me on a future women-only tour. If you're interested, be sure to send me a note at beth@wandertours, WANDER, wandertours.com. And I actually have a long list of people who want to join me in the future. So really, you need to give me advance notice so that I can send you out the details as soon as they're available. So the She's Bold podcast, that's why you're here. Hopefully the name tells you a lot of what you need to know about the podcast, but I'll elaborate a little bit. This is where I feature long-form, in-person, one-on-one conversations with bold women. Now, if you're new to the podcast, I encourage you to go back to episode 1 and listen to why I'm here bringing you these conversations. I'll tell you that in short, it's because I don't think we hear enough from women who are doing extraordinary things. Whether it's because we don't have a loud enough bullhorn to tell our stories or because we're afraid to speak up, I'm not sure what it is. But what I do is I seek out these women because I know how important it is that we hear from them. And really, I'm honored every time I get to sit down and chat with these ladies, and I'm so happy to bring their stories to you. I really do hope you enjoy them as well, and I'd love it if you'd leave a rating or a review on whatever platform it is that you're listening to this podcast. And if you'd like to go one step further, pop over to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon and join our community there. Basically, for just $5 a month, it's the cost of a nice bar of dark chocolate that you know will not last by the end of this episode. You'll eat it so fast. For just $5, you'll get access to additional content that includes a bonus question that I ask guests. So you'd be doing me a solid and you'd be able to hear the answers to special questions that I ask, and I save that just for Patreon supporters. So it's shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. I know you've been thinking about doing it. I just want you to plop yourself down right now, take a moment to take care of that small show of support. And of course, I would just be tremendously grateful to you. With that, let me tell you a little bit about today's conversation. It's with Caroline Paul. Caroline is the author of several books, including The Gutsy Girl, Escapades for Your Life of Epic Adventure, as well as the book Fighting Fire. And that one's about her 13 plus years as a San Francisco firefighter. Caroline has given a lot of thought to what it means to be brave, and specifically how this relates to females and how we are often taught to be fearful starting at a very early age. Caroline really wants to help change attitudes and language toward young girls in order to get them to be more independent and adventurous. This is a really powerful and fascinating conversation, and I encourage you to share it with moms and dads of young girls, as well as directly with young women. There's just so much here that could change a young person's life. with that, please enjoy this conversation with Caroline Paul. So I had a funny thing happen to me. I just had lunch down the street not too far from here. And as I was sitting there having my salad, there was a guy sitting next to me talking to his friend. He said, yeah, Lisa wants to take motorcycle safety classes. And the guy said, He said, yeah, I'm worried. And he said, the friend said, well, if anybody, it would really suit her. And he said, yeah, I know, but yeah, I'm just really concerned about it. And I couldn't hear enough about why he was concerned.
Well, maybe because it's motorcycles.
It's a motorcycle. Oh, my God. But I just thought I wanted to say something to him. I was just...
You wanted to interview Lisa.
Yeah, I did want to interview Lisa. Yeah. I was like, where's Lisa? Actually, you probably don't know this. Maybe you do. I rode a motorcycle from Seattle to Panama. Yes, I did a solo trip. And all I wanted to say was, dude, I rode 9,000 miles.
There you go.
Yeah, or 7,000 miles.
Do you know how to fix your own motorcycle?
No. Gosh, no. They're so electronic. It's like cars now. They're so complicated. Like I used to change my own oil in my Jeep, and I used to do stuff on my old motorcycles. But you can't do that now because it's so complicated. Yeah. I have a BMW, and it's really difficult. So anyway, would you have interjected and said something if you overheard that kind of conversation?
No, I don't usually interject. I don't think so. I would have probably leaned a little closer.
To hear what was going on. Yeah. You could have just slipped them your Gutsy Girl book. And just
if they were talking about ultralights, I might have, because that's such an unusual, a lot of people, their opinions are wrong because they actually don't fly them. But that I might have said something.
Tell me about ultralights. Let's just literally drop into that because that petrifies me. That is something I ride a motorcycle and I know that's really scary to a lot of people and you're laughing. You're like, yeah, I wouldn't go down a bike.
Right.
But an ultralight, you're flying in the sky. You could drop out. Why is that not scary for you?
Oh, it can be scary. I fly something that is even sort of doesn't even really look flyable. It's a hang glider wing with a sort of lawnmower underneath it, or go-kart is probably a better description underneath it. And so that's what I fly. It's a motorized hang glider almost. And I sometimes get gripped. There's something about being super, super high away from the earth and everyone that makes you feel a little lonely sometimes, but not in a bad way.
But it doesn't scare you.
But it does sometimes, but that's okay.
But it's not, I guess it's not such a fearful thing that it prevents you from doing it.
Oh, yeah, no. I really believe that fear is a normal reaction, and it's an important reaction. It saves our lives a lot of times. It's a way we use it as just a flag, a red flag, maybe an orange flag, while we're assessing a situation. So fear is part of so many things. I think that I'm unusual among women in that, not because I don't feel fear, because I do, but because I don't mind it. And I see it as just one signal that's talking to me, one clue about the situation. And then I look at all the other emotions that I'm having at the time. If I get in my ultralight, it's going to be exhilarating. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awe-inspiring. And I want those things too. So I look at my fear, and if the conditions are right, I realize, that fear is just an old reaction or some primal reaction. Totally normal to going 10,000 feet in the air, but, not really relevant. So then I get in my ultralight and I take off.
So most people would be stopped by that, though. Why aren't you? What's your training, either mentally or educational wise, that you can just go past that?
I actually was a very fearful kid. I'm an identical twin, and my twin is way more precocious than me. So she was a buffer to the world, so it allowed me to sit back and feel fearful and shy, which I was, and she sort of protected me because she took all the attention and she did all the interactions. And but I also really wanted a life of adventure. I read a lot about adventure in books. All my favorite books were adventure books, the Narnia books, Harriet the Spy, Sherlock Holmes. And so I gradually realized that you can't be uber fearful and have an adventurous life. You have to sort of make peace with your fear somehow.
How old were you when you figured that out?
I don't think I could really put an age on it.
Was it 8, or was it in your teens, or was it much later than that?
Oh, no, we're talking 8.
Okay.
Yeah, I think by my teens I had, because we learned to bicycle when we were 5, swim 5, ski 5. We were super young. We lived in the country part of the time. And my mom, and I've talked about this, but my mother, she had a really fearful mother who did not believe girls should take any physical risks at all. So there was no outdoor playing.
So your grandmother?
Yes. And my mom didn't really realize that this was going on, of course, because she's a kid, that it was just completely normal for her mother to tell her she couldn't, get dirty or get on a bike or any of that. And when she was in her early 20s, she went on a ski trip. And she was out of her mom's purview by now. Mm-hmm. And she had so much fun. And she didn't die. She didn't even get hurt. Mm-hmm. And she realized everything she'd been missing. And I don't, the way she tells it, pretty much right then, she knew that if she had kids, they would not live that life. So my mother wasn't trying to instill character building aspects into us. She just wanted us to have fun as kids. And she also wanted us to try a lot of things so that when we were adults, we could pick and choose. We would know, we don't really love playing the flute. We're not musical. But we had a chance because for a little while she made us each play an instrument.
So that in those young years, like at 5, when you said that you learned to swim and to bike, that was her. She was doing that very intentionally, getting you out there to do semi-adventurous things. Is that right?
And it was also a different time. Like, you didn't want your kids in your hair. It's not like now where kids love talking to adults. We thought adults were just strange alien creatures who were super boring. All they did is they didn't do anything. They just talked, stood around and talked. So
and drank and smoked cigarettes.
Yes. So it was it was also normal for kids to go off on their own all day outside without any supervision and come back by the time it's dark. I guess they call it free range parenting, but we were beyond that. We were pasture raised. Mm-hmm. It wasn't this was normal. But my mom also did intentionally want us to experience. So for instance, this is outside the realm of physicalness, but she wanted us to be able to have a sense of spirituality. They were not religious at all, so they picked a church. We're going to be Episcopalian. So it was just it was an intentional way to just broaden our lives. And also, I don't know how much she could articulate this, my mom, because the language, again, wasn't there, especially in parenting, but I think she wanted us to push outside our comfort zones.
And this is your twin sister, and then
a younger brother.
A younger brother. How much younger is he?
He's 2.5 years younger.
Okay, and you grew up on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And when you say the country, whereabouts was that?
In rural Connecticut, on the upper northwest corner.
Okay, yeah. And during those, so you're doing kind of these adventurous things, maybe a little bit more adventurous than your first grade friends. So you're doing these things, and then somehow is it 18 you learned to fly?
Yeah, I think I was 18.
Again, for me, that is so outside of my realm of possibilities, even today.
Yeah.
But at 18, what led up to that? Was that something that your parents had kind of fostered you into, or you just identified something and said, yeah, I'm going to go do that?
Well, I think this is where it's really important to have role models. As a kid, I did not have a lot of female adventurer role models at all. So most of my role models were male. I remember reading about Ned Gillette at National Geographic, and he sort of took what he called the red tomato, as a boat across the Pacific or the Atlantic. I don't know. But I was inspired by Ned Gillette, there were all these adventurers who I would read about in magazines and books. But most of them were men, except one, and that was Amelia Earhart. And she was a sort of one female adventurer that most people knew. And at the time, I didn't realize there was actually anybody else. But when I was researching Gutsy Girl and writing short bios on the side, along the as sidebars for the book, in fact, I found there were female adventurers, just nobody talked about them. There wasn't a myth. They weren't given the mythic status that male adventurers were. And we just didn't have, I don't know if it was intentionally suppressed or they were considered so oddball or people just intentionally forgot about them. But there are many. There is Fanny Workman, who climbed the Himalayas in the 1800s in a skirt. These women were tough, tougher than the men, because they were still under the strictures that females were under. There's just more than you think. And I wish I had had them as role models, because then maybe I would climb the Himalayas if I'd known about Fanny Workman. But instead, all I knew about was Amelia Earhart. So flying seemed like something that was, in the possibility. And then I had a male friend, who was my age, a little bit older, and he flew. So that helped.
Mm-hmm. And so did you just what is that process? You're 18 and you go to get your license. And I always assumed that was an expensive.
Yeah.
A
lot of being in the outdoors, by the way, is privileged these days, which is unfortunate. And I think needs to change, because people of color and who've been locked out of all the means, right? Who have been locked out of that for so many years, don't have the means. And so, yes. So I do. Some of this is, I talk from a position of privilege, and I'm sort of shamefaced about that. I don't want the focus to be on, oh, she learned to fly. It's more that it's cool to get outside your comfort zone. And it happened to be, at the time, the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, to learn to fly, because you didn't have GPS. It was just you and your pencil and a compass and a map. And you had to do all these calculations on your lap as you flew. It was super difficult and just eye-opening for me, who'd always been a really good, pretty able to, take tests pretty easily. And suddenly I was pretty flummoxed a lot of the time.
How long did it take you to actually get your license?
So long ago, I don't remember, but and I was going to college at the same time.
Okay. So. Yeah. Well, that must have been odd for your college mates. Or did they even
Probably
know what you were doing?
I don't think I talked about it that much. Yeah. It's just, I don't think people knew a lot about what I did on the side.
What did you study at school?
I studied communications.
What was your intention? To be a writer?
My intention was to make a living having adventures. So I didn't know at the time. Well, what I knew at the time was that if you were a journalist or a documentary filmmaker, like Dave Brashears, he was also one of my people that I admired growing up. And he is a climber who turned filmmaker and had access to this amazing jobs as a cinematographer, because nobody could climb to the places he could. And he now brought a camera. So he combined two loves of his and could live outdoors and have adventures. So that was my goal when I studied communications.
To somehow bring the stories to life, to have the adventure and then bring it to life in one way or the other.
Mostly just have the adventure and have a sort of make a respectable living from it. And, I, in a lot of ways, succeeded, not because I was a journalist, because though I did do journalism for a little while, I actually fell into a job that is historically not female at all. And I had no role models. I knew nobody. And yet, luckily, through chance, and again, the importance of role models, I just can't emphasize. I just luckily fell into what became my career, which is becoming a firefighter in San Francisco.
Yeah. Can you talk about that story, about how that came about, from writing to the test taking? I've heard the story, but I think listeners would really appreciate that. Do you mind talking about that?
No, not at all. I mean, I was a morning news anchor at a radio station here in Berkeley called KPFA. And I didn't do any reporting myself. I was not a good reporter, by the way. It was unfortunate, but truth seemed slippery to me. So this objectivity that a journalist claimed, I couldn't quite grasp it. But I was fine at being a news anchor, because all I did was rip wire. So all the stories that came over the wire, and they physically came over the wire at the time, they go, and this paper would come out, and there'd be reams of paper on the floor, and all of it had the news that was happening right then. It was really exciting, actually. So when I say rip wire, I mean I'd rip it off the machine, and I'd look, and I'd see what I thought was important. And I'd write up the story, and then by the end, I'd have a whole little newscast. I was the news anchor, me and one other person, or just me on my own. And at the time, there were all these stories coming across about the San Francisco Fire Department and how racist and sexist it was. And there was also a test coming up. And so I thought, why don't I go take the test? I'll be an undercover muckraking journalist, and I'll find the racism and sexism during the testing process, and I'll write an amazing story on this. And yeah, that was naive for a couple of reasons. First of all, racism and sexism doesn't show up that way. It's a lot of the power of racism and sexism is that it's so insidious. And it's very hard to pinpoint. So you can't just walk into an institution, look around, and be like, there it is.
Yeah. Oh, look at this question that,
or look at the person, that person looked at me this way or said something. I mean, it just doesn't happen, which is why it's a powerful scourge, frankly. So I took the test and went through each step, and there were 3 or 4, the physical test, the interview, the psychological, the medical. And I tested really high. I actually placed I was called on the first part of the list.
Did you expect that?
I was within the top. I didn't actually, because even though I'm sort of overeducated, college and some grad school, so I've taken tests I never thought of myself as that. I'm just not that academic. I'd rather be outside. But so I was surprised, and it seemed like a message from the heavens. But also by then, I had gone in trying to uncover the evil racism and sexism. But by the end, I had realized that this was exactly the sort of job I was looking for.
How was that? Like, how did you go from being a journalist to thinking, oh yeah, the firefighter is exactly what I'm looking for? That seems like a big leap to me.
Well, because it combined adventure with, a livable wage.
But not the kind of adventure you had initially expected.
Not outdoor adventure per se, but certainly running into a burning building is adventurous. And it actually expanded my realization or my definition of adventure, because running into a burning building was exciting, and I loved going to fires, which is very hard for normal civilians. If there's firefighters listening, they'll be nodding their heads.
Oh,
right
I totally
now.
get it.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
But whenever I say that to a civilian, their faces sort of drop and they get a little pale. And I get it.
It's what you're trained for, though. That's the whole point, right? Of being a firefighter, is that you're trained for that kind of work. And when you're answering calls to help the homeless guy up off the street, like, that's just not as interesting. That's not what you were trained for, right? Is that where you're coming from?
No, I'm actually coming from the fact that people are a little taken aback that I'm so psyched to run into a fire, which most people, first of all, run out of. And secondly, there's something bad about fires, which of course it ruins people's lives. So when I say that, I think it's only really other firefighters who realize that there is this excitement that and this danger that we thrive on. But that said, tending to homeless people, birthing babies on the sidewalk, going into people's homes to help them in their really most intimate time where they really need you, they're dying, they're very sick, they're very scared. That actually turned out to be high adventure as well. And that was eye-opening to me. Those highly emotional moments where you have to summon both your practical skills and your compassion. And frankly, I'm a nice person, but that was hard.
Well, because you'd been taught, probably reading into it, you had probably been taught to kind of shut that off to a certain degree, right? To be a firefighter, because if you get too emotional as you walk up to a fire, then that's not a good thing. You're not going to be as excited to rush in and try to help the situation.
Right. And actually it was more about being too emotional. For instance, doing CPR on a baby. You just can't be too emotional until after, and then you can go cry by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think men have the same issues? Do you think that they're able to let down their guard and get emotional? And do you think that they have the same struggle as you? Or do you think that because you are female and maybe a little bit more empathetic, that's more unique to a female firefighter?
I can't really speak to that, because I don't find that men are not empathetic or that women are necessarily more empathetic. I've just seen too many instances where those women not being that empathetic and men being, deeply moved. So I can't really speak to that, but I will say there's a culture of tamping that down. because I think we were a culture, all of us were a culture of tamping that down. So firefighters, the fire department's 150 years old, very traditional. So there weren't things like the stress unit until really the 80s.
The stress unit meaning a place for a firefighter to go to get help.
Yes, if they're having, or even for a crew to get help. So we would often be summoned to the stress unit after a difficult call. If it was extremely gory, or often if there were babies involved, for sure. And that was sort of new. And there was a culture of, nah, let's not speak. We're cool. We're good. And I think there's more PTSD among firefighters, certainly police officers, definitely paramedics, who definitely get overlooked in this whole first responder. Paramedics do an amazing job. And there's just, because there again, it springs from a very male culture, and their rituals are different. Not bad. I really don't think it's bad. And there's something very, you can't always be talking all the time about your feelings. That's just, it doesn't work. And so I don't think it's fair to say that this is an unhealthy environment where you don't necessarily always express your emotions, even after a really traumatic situation. There are aspects to that work, but of course, then it doesn't work anymore. And that is why I think there was so much drinking in the fire department. I can't really speak to the police department, but there certainly was when I came in, a lot of drinking. And again, that comes from also a culture where drinking was pretty normal. This was the 80s, the late 80s. Mm-hmm. So we were just beginning to look at that as a country.
And you were one of the first female firefighters in San Francisco, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How were you accepted or not at that time?
Oh, well, first of all, the fire department's like a town. It's like a small town. There's every kind of person there. There's the drunk, there's the gossip, there's the mean person, and there's really lots of really good people, lots of good men. Nevertheless, I could pretty much tell you that to a person, the men did not think women could do the job. And a lot of women didn't think women could do the job. And I understand why. I never held that against anybody. Because it was super stressful, because of course, whenever you went into a burning building or on any call, you weren't just Caroline, the firefighter, doing her work and maybe making a mistake or not making a mistake. You were all women. And so it's just really, there was a lot of pressure. So, but nevertheless, the fact they believed this, I didn't hold it against them, because think about it. Title IX had only come about in 1972. Title IX gave girls equal access to sports, among other things. So finally, there was this first generation of girls who did sports at a young age, and I was that generation. In 72, I was 9. So I had access to sports, and I grew up way more physical than the friends and wives of these firefighters. So no wonder they didn't think I could do the job. So I didn't hold that against them at all. Where I really was surprised, though, is not only didn't they think that women were strong enough, they didn't think they were brave enough. And that I did not find any good reason for. And again, it's not just men, it's women who think that too.
Well, it's just like the guy who was sitting next to me, at lunch today, talking about his girlfriend. I'm assuming it's a girlfriend, who knows, about her wanting to take a motorcycle class. And maybe she's not brave enough or bold enough or skilled enough or whatever it is. It's kind of that same thing, that preconceived notion about it.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated how we view women and how we as women view ourselves. And one of the biggest things is that we do not believe in our capacity for bravery. And sometimes it's not even about whether we believe in our bravery or not. It's not part of our paradigm. Whereas boys grow up at a very young age thinking about bravery all the time. Are they brave enough? Or, are they ballsy enough? Are they tough enough? And they have, of course, their peers egging them on. There's an aspect of that can be very unhealthy. But I wrote The Gutsy Girl because I was very concerned about a culture that prizes fear in girls over bravery in girls. Fear, to me, is a very limiting emotion that doesn't give you a lot of avenues. Bravery is an expansive emotion that opens up your life, it does not mean you're going to get yourself in risky situations. It simply means you're getting outside your comfort zone and making decisions for yourself.
I often talk about how we are taught, girls are taught, females are taught from that very early age about what we can't do, whether it's not proper or it's not safe or we just don't have the physical capability of doing it. And then what happens, it becomes so ingrained that we just talk ourselves out of it. And that's really so much of the work that I do, is trying to enlighten people to the fact that they're talking themselves out of something before they even allow the seed of an idea to come to fruition. Because it's just, and I do it myself. I still find, I think we all do it. I think women are particularly prone to doing it, but I do find it with myself. I told myself for 45 years that I wasn't a runner. That was just something that I didn't do. And I never explored that. And I find myself still to this day of like, that's whatever it is, that's something that is not part of me. And then I think, well, wait a minute, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can, like, I do not like being in cold water. Like if I have to cross a stream, being an outdoor adventurer and across a stream, like I just seize up. I'm so cold. I hate it. Well, this year I did the polar bear plunge and jumped into the Puget Sound on New Year's Day. It was like 36 degrees outside and I was freezing. And I just thought I have to do that. That's just one thing. So I think it's unwinding not only what we've been told, but what we're telling ourselves.
Well, that's why role models are so important, because, to untangle the cultural messages we get is hard. But just to see someone who looks like you doing it, if you're a person of color, seeing someone on TV is so important. If you're a woman, seeing someone doing running your marathons across deserts, and we need that out there. And we need to laud those women. We need to hold them up. But again, we don't want them to disappear like all those women who were actually doing adventurous things when I was a kid and I didn't know about. So yeah, I think that the message that I find the most destructive and that I talk about a lot in my work is that parents tell girls at a very young age not to take risks. Physical risks, this is the way it looks, because of course emotional risks aren't, as a kid, there aren't a lot out there, emotional risks to take. It's really about physical risk. And that's why I'm so such a big proponent of girls going outside, because that's where you learn to take risks the most, the easiest, right? It's the easiest school for risk. There's obviously a lot of other ways to take risks, but as a kid, let's get our kids outside. Instead, what we have is a culture of parents constantly cautioning their girls, and they don't notice it. And it comes from it's a cycle. They themselves, as girls, were cautioned. Boys saw girls getting cautioned. They grow up to be moms and dads, and they simply try to do the best for their girls by cautioning them. But what they don't realize is and again, they did this study, which I've talked about a lot. But it's kind of eye-opening, where they were on a playground and they watched moms and dads with their kids, and they saw that parents were way more likely to caution their girls against playing on this particular equipment, which happened to be a playground fire pole, than they were boys. And not only did they caution their girls, but if the girl wanted to do it on her own, they would assist her. And right there, that message is so powerful and so destructive. You're basically telling a girl that she shouldn't do it because she can't. She's not good enough. She's going to hurt herself. And then if she really insists, well, we have to help you. Mm-hmm. And I think we go through life after that, thinking that most things are beyond us. We're just simply going to hurt ourselves, whether it's physical or emotional or psychological. And if it is beyond us, if we do actually move outside our comfort zone, we need help. And I see it a lot in my female friends who say, and acquaintances who say very readily how scared they are about a lot of things that aren't scary. And what I want to say to them, and I sometimes do, is, can you just repeat that sentence? I need you to just substitute a different word because I don't think scary is what you mean here. You might mean nervous. You might mean worried. You might mean unself-confident. But scary, let me tell you what scary is. Scary is running inside a burning building. Scary is CPR on a baby. It is not changing a tire. It is not, going to a party. Let's really pick our words carefully here because words matter. And we are taught as women to use the word scary and fear and fearful. In fact, I do a lot when I do interviews. A lot of people ask me a lot of questions coming from a paradigm of fear, like what were you afraid of? What is this fear? Overcoming fear. And I just don't want to talk about overcoming fear. I want to talk about being brave because bravery is a paradigm that you live in. Bravery is just what you bring. And watch boys and men. It's what they bring to situations. They have fear. Of course, I've seen men who are scared, and I've had men tell me they're scared in a fire. But in general, what they're doing is they still value bravery as the paradigm within which they want to move. And what happens is then you confront it, and you make decisions and move forward and through, whereas fear doesn't do that.
How would you recommend a person figure out what it is that they want to do when maybe so much of their life is based around fear? And as an example, let's just take somebody who's never traveled outside of the US. And it's not even on their radar. They don't even think of it as a possibility because whatever, maybe an economic situation, but perhaps because of the way that they were raised. But it's not even on their radar. And I'm just using travel as an example because that's me, right? Because I'm the traveler. But how do you open up a person's world to make them realize that anything is possible for them? Whether it's travel or becoming a gourmet chef or running a marathon, whatever it is.
Well, first of all, I really want to emphasize that when I talk about bravery, I don't want anyone to necessarily follow the quote brave things I do. It's not my comfort zone they should be getting out of. It's their own. And so if someone doesn't want to climb Denali, you shouldn't. I don't want you to either. I just want you to open up your own life by pushing your own comfort zone. So that could be, and most people know what that is. They know it. And if you don't actually know the outer edge of it, which they often don't because they stop, is you begin by embracing bravery as a paradigm, not fear. Stop saying you're scared. I'm tired of it. Really, I don't want to listen to it. I want you to tell me how brave you are because brave inherently is about fear. Inherently, because bravery is about overcoming fear already. So let's just drop you change your vocabulary.
Right. And what they say that you can't hold two thoughts at the same time, right? So if you're focused on fear, you're not going to be focused on bravery. Same thing. If you're focused on bravery, you're not going to be focused on fear. So to your point, just focus on the bravery.
Focus on the bravery. It covers everything.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah.
So what I encourage is micro bravery, which is a concept that is not mine. It's where I first heard it was a girls program here in Oakland who I went to talk to about understanding better girls' confidence issues. And they talk about micro bravery for girls, which is basically small acts of bravery, where you start to push outside your own comfort zone in any way you can, in small ways. Don't suddenly travel on your own. Don't do that because that's not going to be even fun. It might not even be what you want to do. But when you start practicing bravery, it's like practicing anything. It's like practicing soccer. And you don't just go and run into a soccer game. You practice dribbling. You break it down into its teeny parts. Dribbling, kicking, cardiovascular health. And you sort of train for bravery by pushing outside your comfort zone and being very aware of how you feel so that not only are you opening up your life when you do that, but you're starting to understand yourself better because a lot of women don't understand what fear really feels like. They're muddling it with all those other emotions of anxiety and unself-confidence. And so it's this sort of large gray sort of swirling mass. They're like, that's fear. No, it isn't. That's a range of emotions. So once you start practicing bravery, you really start understanding yourself better. And so you will start to know what you really want to do in your life and what looks really fun and fulfilling, and also the scary parts that you then have to overcome. You'll see it very clearly. And again, you can actually practice micro bravery towards that goal once you see it. So if you want to climb a tree that's 150 feet, you first climb, maybe a ladder, maybe a short ladder. And you do this all in steps till you're at the top of your 150-foot tree. But you practice, because that's really good news, right? Mm-hmm. That bravery's learned.
Yeah. I think part of what I was trying to get at before was that oftentimes we're so unaware of what it is that we are fearful of, or are nervous about, or don't want to do, or don't think that we're capable of doing, that it's not even, it's barely an inkling in our mind, and then one day we realize, why not? All those years, somewhere in the back of my head, I told myself that I couldn't do that. And then suddenly, wow, wait a minute. Maybe it's finding the role model. Maybe it's seeing someone for the first time of who's done something, and then saying, wait a minute, that's been on the back of my mind for a long time.
I also think when you embrace a bravery paradigm, I think it'll show up pretty quickly. Because I think you're just more open to new experiences. Yeah.
Your focus has been on girls. Do you have kids?
Mm-mm.
Why the focus on girls? And I ask that because I think it's wonderful, by the way. It's interesting because I'm 53, and much of what I've done in my world has been to focus on my demographic, because I see it. I see it in my peers. I see how other women my age, younger and older, stop themselves from doing certain things for a variety of reasons because of the stories that they're telling themselves. But you aren't known for, and I don't think any of the work that you've actually done to this date has been to your peers, to women in your age group, but you're working with younger girls and promoting that. Why is that?
As a writer, my first 3 books were for adults. So it never occurred to me. And again, I don't have children. I have 9 godchildren, but I don't have children. So it actually didn't occur to me that I would be an apt messenger to kids at all. So it really happened. The actual seminal moment was when someone heard a story that I read about some terrible mishap I'd had in the outdoors, which I've had a lot, and said, you should write a book for girls because they need to hear these adventures. And I think what she was saying was they need a role model. But what I realized is that also it's late when you talk to your peers. It's just, I'm 55. And if I'm talking to women about fear, that's a lot to unload for them. And really, I think it's hard. We're old dogs that can't learn new tricks. I mean, why should we in some ways?
But it's beautiful when we do.
Oh, it is.
It's huge.
It's huge. But that's 50 years of not doing all this stuff. So I thought, how I realized, oh, you know what? It's so important to talk about this so young because the messages start so early. And so this was an effort to counteract that. And I have to say, I've gotten letters that are so moving from kids, from parents about their girls. And after reading The Gutsy Girl, how that word gutsy became part of their vocabulary. That to me was the biggest win for this book because it gave girls this paradigm that they hadn't been offered before. Like, guess what? Being brave is fun. And they embrace that.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned before we started recording that you had been in an accident. Was that your ultralight?
Mm-hmm.
In an ultralight. Can you talk about that accident?
Yeah. I hate talking about injuries and accidents, but unless they're funny. And I actually did write about my accident in one of my books.
Why do you hate talking about it?
It feels sort of dark and wallowing and sort of beside the point.
I get it.
And it's God. And I was yeah.
I think it's important, like what we talk about is really important. Like when you get together with an old friend who may know you really well and they say, hey, Caroline, what's up? The choice of words that you use is going to affect that person's day and their view of you. Whether you tell them about this tragic thing that just happened to you in the kitchen when you dropped a glass and cut your foot? Or are you going to say, oh my gosh, I just made the best breakfast ever? Like that matters. Two pretty innocuous things. But so I understand if you talking about an accident, that's not what you want to dwell on. What I am most interested in, and you don't have to talk about the accident, but I'm interested in how you get over that. Like you have an accident and then you go, okay, I got to pick myself back up and do this.
Yes.
Because we all go through that. Even if we're able to get past our comfort zone and we do something that's brave, we're going to screw up. What happens? How do you pick yourself back up from that?
And I love that too, because it's an interesting insight into the psychology of self-improvement and self-assessment. And so I like that too. So basically what happened was I was flying my ultralight, again, a hang glider with a go-kart underneath. Yeah. And I had been having problems with my wing and I'm not detail oriented. And I tend to like to ignore things that I can't immediately handle. And I'm a experienced pilot. I've been flying again since I was 18, different things. I flew paragliders, single engine land planes, Cessnas. And then now I was flying ultralights, or we call them trikes. And I had a wing that wasn't flying well, and I basically ignored it. Total pilot error. Then I flew on a day that no one really should have been flying. The winds were not only super strong, but gusting. It was not but I thought I was a good pilot. I mean, anybody wants to sort of look at it was a total cautionary tale of someone who had overconfidence and sort of under scrutiny, under scrutinized their own plane.
When did this happen?
In 2008.
Okay.
So basically I took off and the plane immediately started to lose control. So I turned around to land and I was fighting it the whole way. It was terrible. And I came into land and I stalled about, I don't know how many feet above. Because again, I had a wing that wasn't tuned correctly. So in those kind of winds, stalling is one of the things that really might happen. You have to be careful of. And I stalled and just augured in to the runway. Mm-hmm. And I had no head trauma, luckily. I did have stitches in my head and injuries to my arm, but mostly I just compressed my left ankle to a degree they thought I wasn't going to walk.
Is this something that you're sitting down in an ultralight? Okay.
Yeah.
But when you landed, you hit your ankle.
Yeah. I landed sort of mostly the left side, The really interesting part about it was when I was being attended to by the paramedics, this young paramedic, super handsome dude, could have been my grandson, probably, was taking care of me in the ambulance. And I was all packaged really tightly, so I had a C-spine. I couldn't turn my head, of course. And I had seen so many people in this situation, and I had helped package them like I had just been packaged. And I was in the ambulance, and he just had his hand on my shoulder the whole time. He called me darling, he called me dear, he called me sweetheart. And it was so comforting. And every time he talked to me, he'd lean over so he could see me. And I remember thinking they hadn't given me morphine yet because I had refused it. But my pre-morphine haze, I thought, oh, I wish I was like this guy when I was a firefighter. I hope I was like this guy when I was a firefighter. And then I think I passed out.
I bet you were.
But the interesting part is that when I recovered, took a year, I wanted to fly again, and I found that I didn't like flying. I was super tense. I was super irritated all the time. I didn't like it, and I realized, oh, you're scared. This is your version of fear. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be like this PTSD person who doesn't enjoy flying anymore, then I'm not going to fly. But I would like to give this a chance because I've been flying so much and I love it. So I went to a hypnotist and she hypnotized. I went to 2 sessions, and after that, I have to say that I love flying now. I fly every week. People think can't believe it when they hear after that kind of an accident that I'm still flying, but I'm not the pilot I was. I do get gripped in situations where I get a little bit of turbulence, and that I know consciously means nothing. I'm going to be fine, but I have that just reaction, and I just roll with it because I want to fly.
Yeah.
More than I want to be super scared on the ground.
And you're also paragliding?
I don't paraglide anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that because of the accident?
It was because
because paraglide, you do land on your feet, right?
Yes. I hurt my knee in the fire department, and I eventually had it replaced, but I decided that I should probably go to motorized flight again so that I would be easier on my body.
Yeah.
Didn't really quite turn out that way.
How long were you a firefighter?
14 years.
And now your time is spent writing. Is that correct?
Yeah,
and we're here at the Grotto in San Francisco, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's my writing space full of writers who we talk each other back into our bravery paradigms.
Yeah. Do you come here every day to write?
Almost every day, of the week. Yeah,
and
4 days a week.
I'm curious about your process because I'm also working on another book right now, but I need a grotto in Seattle. I need a space that's just dedicated for that. Do you come in and you have a word count, a number of hours that you're spending every day? Do you kind of have a block of either time or words that you work on?
I mean, it depends. Right now I'm between projects. I just published 2 books, actually, sort of back to back. So I'm a little...
What are those books? Are they actually out now?
I wrote a book for kids called You Are Mighty, A Guide to Changing the World. And that is empowering, not just girls, but boys too, to become activists, little activists for whatever they think is right or wrong. It's not really for me to say, but it's a book about tactics of activism and examples of kids who have used those tactics to great effect. And it's meant to inspire kids and give them a blueprint for any causes that they want to support.
Mm-hmm. And the other book?
That was actually done with a friend of mine. He's a tea purveyor. In fact, I've been to Bhutan on a trip looking for tea with him.
No kidding.
One of my closest friends.
Who is that? Who's your friend?
Sebastian Beckwith. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book called A Little Tea Book. But I actually wrote it, and it's all his knowledge. Yeah. So we co-did that, and that was a fun project.
Yeah. So you were in Bhutan.
But people are like, what? Tea. Hold it. You went from Gutsy Girl and fighting fire and terrible injuries to writing a tea book? Are you calming down a little? Like, I hope not.
I hope not, too. Hey, I'm really curious as to what you think will happen with this next generation of girls, kids, because you're talking about the book that you wrote to encourage boys and girls to be activists. And I think it's really interesting to think about what is going to happen because the world has changed so much in the last 20, 35. Just in 5 years, it's changed so much. But really, when you talk about a generation or 2 generations, do you have hope? Let's just stay on the bravery. Do you have hope that the upcoming generation of women, of girls turning into women, will have a huge, so many more opportunities, just huge chances for doing things because they have role models like you and like I and like so many other women who are out there doing some great things, and that information is out there being published and promoted so much.
I do. I mean, I think I see it already, that confidence seems to be something that parents are valuing, and so they want to teach it in their girls. It's interesting because I think that we have focused on teaching girls to be fearful because we want to protect them. Not only do we not believe they can do whatever it is, but we actually want to protect them from all these perceived evils in the world, because the world seems to be a more dangerous place for women or females. And that may or may not be true, but that is what's going on. So, and what I think people are beginning to realize is that when you teach fear, you're not actually giving any tools to deal with these dangers. You know, I don't know what the logic is, but maybe is, if we teach fear, then they'll be able to run away from the danger. But that's not the way it works. You know, when you teach kids to be brave at a very young age, you're teaching them really a decision-making process and, risk assessment and confidence in themselves so that they'll be kids who can move in the world in the face of all these dangers that we, see that girls have to face and women have to face, and they'll make the right decisions because that's what's going to save them, is their ability to, their confidence in themselves, because going back to that fire pole on the playground, if you're teaching your girl that she needs assistance, when she's in danger, she's going to turn to someone else to make a decision for her. I mean, that is the most dangerous thing ever. We need to make our own decisions because only we know how to. Our best interest is in our hearts the most. So putting your best interest into someone else's hands is just never. That seems so vulnerable to me. So when we see that teaching fear doesn't teach girls to make the right decisions, I think we're going to start teaching bravery in a big way.
Something you said really captured my attention, and I was really glad that you brought it up because maybe we need different language. Maybe I need different language around this. But when you talk about teaching girls to be fearful, what I think of is running. Okay, so I know that there are areas that I shouldn't go running in. And that comes from, there is a little bit of fear there because I have to make sure that if I go out early in the morning and it's dark out, that I'm running down the middle of the street because I'll be able to see car lights anyway. I don't want somebody to coming out from a bush. That does come from a place of fear. I mean, I'll just say that I have a fear there. It's so ingrained that I didn't even realize I was doing that until a few years ago. I read an article by someone who was describing his female friend, how she has to always be so alert when she runs. And he didn't. And he was like, what? You have to be so concerned about that? And I was like, yeah, dude, we all have to. Like, that's just the way it is for us. But there's another little twist to that. You said when you're brave, it includes risk assessment. Is that, did I hear that correctly? So I think that's a real key, is that rather than me looking at considering myself being fearful about running in a particular part of town or at a certain time of day when it's dark out, I can be brave and I can go out there, but I can look at like, what's the smart thing to do, figure out that risk assessment. Should I wait maybe just a half hour when the light comes up and then I'll go out? Maybe I don't know this neighborhood so well in San Francisco, so I'll wait until I know.
It's funny that you're actually sort of framing this as a fear situation, but it's not because you're going running. So you're being brave. And like I said, fear is always part of everything. I am not against fear. This is a big misunderstanding people have. I think it's super important. It's there for a reason. There are people who are actually physiologically born without fear. They can't feel fear and they get themselves in danger all the time because they can't read a situation. I'm not saying to abolish fear. I'm saying put it in its place. Mm-hmm. Women blow up fear so much and don't look at it carefully. And then also don't look at all the other rewarding things that will happen if they actually do push outside their comfort zone. They're simply focused on fear, fear, fear. Fear is bad. Fear means bad things because that's what we're taught as kids. If you you should be fearful because all these bad things are going to happen. Instead, fear is there to say, hey, remember, it's dark. You're a woman. Why don't you run in the middle of the road? That's great. And so when you teach kids at a young age to do what scientists call risky play, which is play that's outside their comfort zone, like bicycling or on the monkey bars in the playground, you teach kids almost instinctually to start doing all this decision making about risk assessment and what are my own skills in this situation and how far should I actually push to get a little better. All this stuff it's complicated to enumerate right now, but if you've been doing it since you were young, you just know. So fear's good. Fear's great. Just don't embrace it. Just look at it, listen, and then assess all the other things that are going on.
Do you have any thoughts about or opinion about the Me Too movement and how women have become so much more empowered, adult women, not just the girls? And I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in generations to come because of the Me Too movement, because women are being so much more vocal now. But I'm just wondering if that's something that you have given a lot of thought to, that it's a really good positive thing that all of this is coming out in the open and that women are stepping forward and talking about these things really kind of for the first time.
I know, and it's amazing. It's an amazing example of bravery. I mean, you do not have to be on a mountain bike, you're running on a long run through the desert to be brave. This is paramount bravery. What I have been really struck by is how women are supporting women, because I think we've been taught as women not to support each other, because somehow what we're after is our finite resources, and not many women will get, that partner job, that corner office. So you have to turn your back on the other women. But the Me Too movement have shown that the power of women together changes the world.
You think that'll change the boardroom? You think that will change women providing a helping hand for others to lift up across the board, not just in Hollywood, but just around, like, yeah, I have to watch out for my colleague and reach out and help her up as well?
I hope so. I think this has to really start young too. You can't just plop it in the middle of adulthood. You have to be starting at a very young age to tell kids that, well, for one, to tell a girl herself that she's capable, to tell the girl's female friends she's capable, and see the boys also see she's capable. And so you have to start at a really young age. A lot of stuff that happens, I notice, is not full of malice. It's like the fire department. People didn't, want me not to be in that job because they were mean people. They had concerns, and they were valid concerns. They had been instilled at a very young age. So they were just working on that. That's why we have to start really early to talk about how competent and really expansive girls are and can be. And then as women, that's just second nature.
What were their greatest concerns about you being a firefighter?
Ostensibly, I think what they thought was that I wasn't strong enough. And again, it's a very hard job physically, and I did not take that lightly. I was a rower at Stanford, and by then I'd already hiked in the backcountry. I was a paraglider. I mean, I was no stranger to physical activity by any means. And but being a firefighter is really difficult. It's our air packs at the time, they're a lot lighter now, but they were 35 pounds. And then I had to carry an axe. And then I had to have my coat and my helmet on. And then I had to wear a mask. And I weighed it at one point. We were wearing 100 pounds on us. And then you have to go to work. So they had a valid concern. But again, the other thing that I think they were less aware of is they thought I wasn't brave enough. They'd never seen women be brave. Even though if I sat them down and talked to them, I'd say, hold it. Do you know, who do you think the most brave genre of person is? Is it the Green Beret? Is it the firefighter or the police officer? No. The genre of person that's most brave that no one ever questions is the mom. The mother will do anything to save her child. Anything, and no one is surprised. But any other aspects of bravery for women people can't believe it. They could never, when they saw me as a firefighter, they were stunned on so many levels. But if I'd lifted a Volkswagen off my baby, nobody would have been stunned.
Yeah. And you're slight. You're quite a trim, thin woman too.
Now I'm 5'10", and right now I'm about 135, but I was 155 as a firefighter.
That's not a lot more.
No, I was bigger and fit. And there were women who were stronger than me. I had a very rigorous routine of lifting weights and running all throughout my career. And there were women who could definitely outlift me, no question. And there's so many women who are so capable. Just look at the CrossFit women.
Yeah.
I mean, they should all be firefighters.
Mm-hmm. How did you get back to that, like at the fire station? How did you emotionally get past the opinions and judgment from the naysayers?
I didn't emotionally get past it. It's very stressful. Most of the time, it wasn't said to my face, but you could always feel the pressure. And of course, I had my own voice saying, you know what, you really can't do this job. It's very difficult, and you're going to make a mistake. And of course, a mistake as a firefighter can have ramifications that are huge. So I don't think I did. And I had to really look at myself as, why do you care so much what other people think? Of course, we're social animals, so we care. All I can say is that it was difficult and I just soldiered on. And again, a lot of these men were really good men. It's not that they were trying to be mean. Some were, but many were not. And yet you could feel the fact that they didn't quite believe in you. But did I blame them? No.
That's very mature of you.
I mean, physically, I was in better shape than most of them. I was third in my class in the academy physically on all the physical stuff, but behind two men, and it's true, women are not in general as strong as men. But if you would notice in sort of the Navy SEALs and a lot of firefighting crews, the best firefighters, in my opinion, are the small guys, because they don't take their strength for granted, because they understand their limitations. I'm not saying they're not strong, but they have limitations against the big guy who can rip the phone book in half, and we had those guys. But they knew that they were much smaller, and so they combined their smarts with their physicalness. I mean, let's be frank, around the world, most people are smaller. Most men are smaller than me around the world, and they have fire departments that work just fine. So in countries where men are under 5'5", which is not unusual at all, nobody's questioning them. So why are you questioning me? I almost went to the Olympics. Hello. And I'm 5'10", and I was 155 pounds, and I worked out all the time. And there are women like that. Not every woman can do this job, but neither can every man. So think about that.
Yeah, I know. You were luge, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you train? Where were you living?
So just to round that out, when I was in my 20s, I went to Lake Placid to train as a luger, which is that sport where you go down the ice track feet first. And
was it single, or were you with multiple people in the luge?
It's only men's doubles. All women's are single.
Oh, okay.
sleds.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's not the bobsled where there's four.
Right.
So that took discipline and a certain kind of physical ability when you crashed, which I did often. In fact, I had a nickname.
Crash.
And it was Crash. Yes, it was.
So lots of adventures, it sounds like. Lots of crashing adventures.
Yeah.
for you.
So I was like, come on, I can do this fire thing.
Yeah. You just pick yourself back up.
Yeah.
That's exactly. A big deal. I just want to acknowledge that for you, that you aren't dissuaded from soldiering on, moving on to new adventures, even though you find the humor in it and you find continued adventure in it. That's a big deal, because some people might just say, it's time to hang that up and go hang out on my couch and watch Netflix.
I mean, I do want to say that I think a lot of people didn't take it. I kind of flew under the radar. So I wasn't in anybody's way. I was the only woman doing whatever. I was the only woman flying ultralights for a while. Paragliding, there were definitely some other women, but not that many. And they were great pilots. So it just wasn't, people didn't really bother you. You were sort of the exception. So I can't say that I was facing all these obstacles. The firehouse was a different matter. And it was actually, I'm grateful for those obstacles, because as a, privileged white person, I had never really understood what it felt like to be in the minority. Not really. And not wanted. And in the firehouse, that's when I first saw what people of color will tell you their everyday is like, where you walk in and people don't really want you there. Again, they might not be mean people, but they just don't really think much of you on a really deep, unconscious level, like white people do of people of color. I mean, that's how we're acculturated here. And the small microaggressions that, again, people of color will talk about, and those of us who are white, can't really understand. Well, I have to say that I understand, because when you walk into an all-male environment as the only female, which I was for a long time, you are out of place, and you start to understand what it feels like to be that uncomfortable, and the long-term stress of that. So I'm glad for that experience on that level as well.
Yeah. I can't say that I know what it is like to be a person of color or what they go through. So that's not my intention here. But I will say that when this whole Me Too movement blew up and everyone started talking about their experiences, and certainly, I could sit and list all of mine, the crazy things that have happened to me over time. And you just suck it up because that's the way it is. And then you develop these defenses, or you develop these ways to move in the world, whether it's waiting until it gets light out before you go for a run, or you're running in the middle of the street because you don't know if somebody's in the bushes. That's my current world. But I realized that I had developed these things, these protective devices for myself over the years that were so innate. And I just thought, oh my God, this is what people of color go through, or any minority, or anyone, who has I don't have the right word for it, but anyone who is maybe marginalized. This is what they deal with all the time. And it's that extra glance that you get, like a person of color walking into a Starbucks that's filled with white people. It's the extra glance that they get. Totally innocuous, seemingly innocuous, but constantly, day after day after day, you're getting that, and you're having to live with that. And I thought, oh, this is that thing that's so ingrained in me that this is what they're feeling all the time. I get it to whatever degree I can understand it.
Right, because when we get with these added things for being white, so we might be female, but we're still white. So it's a complex intersectional situation. But and I definitely agree, I can't necessarily, I can only start to empathize because, and when I say minority, I mean by numbers, I was the minority.
Sure.
People of color are not the minority in this country anymore, thank goodness. So they're not minorities. But I walked in and was the only woman. There'd be 19 men.
Mm-hmm.
So
were there women after you while you were still in the department?
Oh yeah, now there's
others
hundreds
in the San Francisco Fire Department.
When I first got in, there were 15 women. I was the 15th, and there were 1,500 men. So now I think there's 250.
You said earlier that you're not a detail-oriented person, and that's maybe a little bit one of the failings that happened when you had your accident. But maybe this is more recent, that you are a little bit more detailed in your day, or you're more focused with what you do. Is that fair to say?
I would say I'm not detail-oriented, but I'm very goal-oriented. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, that you have a very structured day.
Oh, I'm rigid is what my wife says to me. Yeah, that has nothing to do with I want to go home and say I am detail-oriented because I'm so structured. I promised her after the accident that I would be more detail-oriented because that was sort of the final straw for her. Like, you did not handle this mechanical issue that you knew about, and look what's happened. So, but no, I have a structure to my day because it's funny that as an adventurer, people think, oh, you're so spontaneous, and I'm actually not. And I like a schedule. I like small goals that I set for myself to sort of organize things so that they make sense to me. And maybe that's why I like adventure so much, because there is that element in it, a big element of surprise. Because otherwise, in my daily life, I try to manage what I can, and I'm working on actually being less rigid there.
So you separate out being rigid and, well, let's say
I don't like the word rigid is probably true, but what I like to say is disciplined.
Yeah. Well, but you separate out being disciplined with being detail oriented, because for you those are two very different things.
They probably are very similar, but I'm making a separation here. So one is about sort of controlling your life, so by day, and the detail-oriented aspect. I was controlling my discomfort because I'm not good at engineering difficulties. I don't really love the engine part of my plane, and fixing things on a wing just seems overwhelming. I wasn't brought up that way. Also, one thing I talk about in Gutsy Girl is let's learn how to build things at a really young age and feel comfortable with that. And I'm also just not interested in that. So I was trying to manage discomfort by ignoring the details. And it's not a smart strategy.
Right.
It's a terrible strategy. So yes, I'm not detailed. I'm sort of a little bit disorganized in just a little, like there's obviously I like my place neat. As you can see, my office is neat, but I don't have Excel spreadsheets on things. A little more.
But you have some
loosey-goosey.
structure to your day.
My day, for sure. I get up at 6. I have coffee. I eat the same thing. I read.
What do you eat?
Oh, just 2 bars. 2 bars.
Chocolate bars?
No. Like proteiny, breakfasty bars kind of thing. Just to start my day in some sort of consistent way. And then I read. It's a kind of a quiet time. And then I come into the office to write. And then I write until, depends, 3 or 4, depending. And I go home and work out. And then I have a dog that I walk. So it's pretty much the same.
Yeah. And you like that.
Well, it helps my writing a lot.
I was going to say, then
to
you don't
guard have to, these times. Like,
right.
I just don't want the day to suddenly slip away and I look around like, what did I actually get done? So I'm a big believer in writing down goals and writing down. So writing down, it's a to-do list, not only of, the grocery, but of your aspirations too. And I believe when you see it on a piece of paper, then it becomes very real. If you just think it, it's a little murkier. So it's one thing I do is, and I like the idea of how many by when. Just really like, let's get a date on this even. You want to write a book? Then when do you want to finish it by? Just give me a date, want a deadline, and then start to break it down even a little more. I guess that's structured. Maybe that's a little detail oriented, but
I just discovered bullet journaling. Have you ever?
No, we actually have a bullet journal group here.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, we as writers, we get together spontaneously to form groups to help each other in our careers. And somebody formed a bullet journal group.
Yeah, I'm having fun with it because it does that. Because I'm a task, a list maker and crossing it all off. And I just started it last month, but I just thought, I think I might really dig this because it gives me the chance to lay out the year and the month and the day and then every little task. It's been super helpful. I don't think I'm super detail oriented myself. I know people who can sit down and they dig into something and they go deeper and they go deeper and they go deeper. And I'm just not like that. Like, I just if it doesn't work, right away, I'm just like, okay, I can't stand this. Like, I just got to move on. But I will say, and just something that I did find really interesting in, again, hearing you speak on another podcast about the rigidity / being focused and being flexible, because it's something that I actually was just talking to my husband, John, about this recently, because I said that I'm trying, I think that yoga would be really good for me because I feel like the flexibility that it brings to your body would be good for my mind too, because sometimes I think that I need to be more flexible. Because if somebody comes to me with an idea and I don't like it, I just go, nope, that's not good. Like, boom. Like, I just make a super fast judgment on it. And I can just say yes or no to it. What he said when I talked to him about this, he said, but you're the charge ahead girl. Like, that's good. You're super focused and you know what you like and you're just super focused and you can just go for it and you'll just charge ahead with it. I still think having a little bit of flexibility in there might be a good thing for me to learn. And it's funny because I heard you saying very similar things to that about being rigid and focused yourself and trying to learn some flexibility. You still working on that?
I think we all have a process, and I should not adopt someone else's process. Like yoga or meditation, I understand is also really good for certain things, and I've tried it, and it doesn't actually seem to really work for me, not at least right now. And so I'm not adopting that process. I know my own process really well. So, for instance, in writing a book, I know that I have this emotional schedule that is pretty predictable, where I'm confident at first, and then I drop into a deep dark hole, and I'm unconfident. I'm like, where is this going? And once you know your process, you're in that step. this is not the end of the world. This is just the step you're in. So just move through this, because the next step is really good. That's when you're confident again. So when you know your own process, that is what works. It also, you know your own red flags. So I know that I am, for instance, too structured sometimes and not detail oriented. So I still will go through my process, but now I know, hey, did you forget a detail here? Because you know you're not detail oriented. I'm not trying to become this uber detail oriented person, because like you're the charge ahead person. Don't become this fastidious person. But maybe just moderate a little bit now that you know where it doesn't really work. Like, what's working? That's all. So I like people to really understand their process no matter what it is. And that means that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, don't freak out. You've done this before. This is step 2.
Do you think that has all served you well in being brave? That having a little bit of rigidity, being somewhat focused, just allows you to see the goal.
Totally.
And you can just work through it.
For me.
Yeah,
yes.
for you.
For me, it has. I mean, structure gives me a stable emotional ground from which to work, a schedule from which to take these leaps outside my comfort zone. And, all the aspects of my person, I think by now I've sort of trying to be a better person all the time. Again, I'm not becoming a different person. I'm just trying to be the better version of myself. And so what could be a character flaw, it could also, in other situations, be really great. And we just have to know when to sort of shuffle, just re-emphasize and de-emphasize. It's exactly like fear and bravery. Fear, again, it's there, but don't pay so much attention to it. Just pay the attention that it requires in the moment. If this is a huge earthquake, okay. But once fear has told you there's been an earthquake, like, let's not be fearful anymore, because it's not helping you. It was there to tell you that you're in a dangerous situation. Now let's move on.
Is there something that you do on a daily basis that kind of keeps you in check?
I work out regularly, and I try to get outside as much as possible. I surf and fly.
Do you surf around here?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
Ocean Beach and Pacifica.
Oh, isn't it cold?
It's cold.
It sounds cold.
Yeah, and I'm not a good surfer. I just like being outside. And last time I surfed, there were dolphins in the wave. Not that I took, unfortunately, but I saw a guy take a wave and a dolphin right in it.
Oh,
so that
gosh.
was, yeah. It's really about being outside for me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not good, and I would like to be better, but it's other things that I surf for other reasons.
Mm-hmm. So normally when I wrap up these conversations, I ask what it means to a person to be bold, but I'll swap that around a little bit, and I'm just going to ask you, what does it mean for you to be brave? If you can just encapsulate that, because I know we've talked about that a lot. But
Sure, no, it's easy to encapsulate. Being brave is moving outside your own comfort zone.
Period. Whatever that is.
Whatever that is.
What are you working on now that you feel like, okay, this is outside of my comfort zone, but I got to work on this?
I would say that right now I'm a little bit dark about climate change. And so I need to push past this wallowing. And it's kind of from a privileged position, I think. If you can even start thinking in depth about climate change right now, it's because you're in a privileged position. So you should, because most people are just trying to get by. So why don't I harness that into something productive instead of being really depressed about it as an outdoors person? So right now I'm in that phase where I'm really trying to move outside the wallowing, super dark phase and see that there's some hope. And if there is no hope, which I don't know if there is, what are you going to do?
How long has that wallowing been going on?
Probably since I wrapped up my last book. So You Are Mighty came out last May, and it was about activism. So I did a lot of research on a lot of the issues that are going on. It was about tactics, obviously, of activism for kids. But so I think also not having a project. So there was that space again. But in some ways, 20 years, because I was aware, again, of the environment from a pretty young age. When I was actually, let's see, it was actually 50 or 48 years, because at age 8, my twin sister and I wrote a letter to Nixon about acid rain.
Oh my gosh.
We were freaked about pollution and acid rain.
Yeah.
So it's been going on a long time for me.
I just, it's been going on for like 3 weeks for me.
Okay.
Embarrassingly,
No.
not 20 years, but I will tell you, I mean, of course I've been aware of it, especially with my travels and the things that I literally see in the world, the dwindling ice caps on Mount Kilimanjaro and in Bhutan and that sort of thing. And, what kind of took me over the edge was I read the report. It actually came out late last year, but I was traveling for a month, so I was pretty much completely offline. But this report that came out that said by 2040, we were all pretty screwed. Like we were just going to be in super big trouble. And that's in 20 years. And it really hit me. And I just thought okay, I am starting to get the picture here that not only are places like, I think it's Kiribati in the South Pacific that's going to be gone pretty soon. And I know people have talked about the animals disappearing and that sort of thing. And I'm particularly enamored with indigenous cultures and concern myself with how to protect them. And I just realized, oh no, we are like frogs in boiling water at this point, that we are in the middle of it. And I'm sure there's conversations going on in DC behind closed doors and around the world of like, we have to contain the population and keep them placated because all hell is going to break loose. Do you feel that way? Like, because I am starting to think like we're in the middle of it, but they're just trying to keep it quiet. And something big is going to happen in my lifetime that there's going to be this terrible explosion of like, we're going to lose islands and we're going to be flooded. And I mean, I head back to Seattle tonight. Tomorrow we could have a foot of snow. Like, we don't get snow in Seattle. We could have a foot in the next few days or so. That stuff is that's like, the shit's getting real. Like, that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, as a firefighter, I've always been, or since being a firefighter, I'm interested in disaster psychology. So if you look at the phases of what happens to someone when they're facing an emergency, the initial phase is complete brain shutdown. I mean, so that it's the denial on the most deepest level. So what actually physiologically happens to people in, say, a plane crash, and they've documented this, is that their brain shuts down so much. Sometimes they're actually paralyzed or blind, physically blind. They cannot see. And it's because we work on patterns as humans. And all of a sudden, we're presented with a pattern that we never thought was possible. We are in a plane crash, which is also, by the way, one of the reasons why people who actually take out those emergency instructions and read them, now they've imprinted on their brain, oh, this could happen, are more likely to survive a plane crash because their brain, which works on patterns, has seen this pattern. They just saw it. They read it. So the first phase of a disaster is this kind of deep denial. And then the second phase is to look around, to look for other people to confirm that this reality is true. And maybe that's what we're doing right now. We're looking around and we're saying, is this really happening? And people are saying, yeah, I think it is. So I think that's where we are. Then we gather together. In a disaster, people find other people to gather together. And finally, they take action. But that's a couple steps. Unfortunately, I think we're only in the looking around and asking phase. I wish we were in the gathering phase or the decisive action phase, but we're not yet.
Do you think that we'll get there before it's too late? Or is that why you're wallowing?
I'm loath to say this. I wrote a book on activism for kids and what they can do because
they won't be listening to this podcast, so it's okay.
Well, I will tell you that I do the math all the time when they come out with numbers about when, this city will be swallowed up, when the sea level will rise this much, when these animals will be gone, where this country will be uninhabitable because of drought. And I try to see whether I'll still be alive because I don't want to see it. The earth will always survive, but unfortunately there's going to be great suffering of animals,
and
which
humans.
is of great concern to me, and humans. And I actually blame, frankly, our generation. I think we were there at the tipping point, and we didn't, which was the 80s when really people, and this information has been around since the early 1900s, that carbon dioxide changes weather, has profound effects on our weather. And by the 1980s, it was science. There were studies on it. So we knew, our generation, 50s, you and I. So I sort of blame us. And, I know, I had an electric car, the first electric car that came out. My twin sister had them in the 80s. I have solar panels. Okay, I'm the do-gooder liberal, but nope, still my fault because this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's wallowing, I guess, for you.
Yeah. Well, let's end on that happy note.
Let's not. Can we figure out one other thing?
Yeah, we can. We can buy your books. We can buy your act. Say the name of the book for the kids.
So it's called "You Are Mighty: A Guide to Changing the World," and it's for kids, 8 to 12, pretty much. And then the Gutsy Girl, Escapades for Your Life of Epic Adventure.
Yeah, I think everyone, especially the activism book, just so that we don't end on a negative note, if everybody goes out and buys a copy of that for the little one in their life or little ones in their life, that would be super great. And then just encouraging, young girls to make change in the world. I think that's so key. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Other than your books and finding them on your website and online, where can people find you in general, your website and social media? Are you active on social media at all?
I amble around on social media. I don't know if active would be the right word.
Okay.
I'm not a jogger. I'm a little bit of a couch potato. I don't really use it that much.
You're a looky Lou.
But I will probably know if you try to reach me through there.
Okay. So through your website is best?
Yeah.
And is that CarolinePaul.com?
Yes.
Okay, great.
CarolinePaul.com. And I'm at Cara Writer on Twitter. And I have an Instagram, Caroline MB Paul.
Great. Okay. And I'll link to those in the show notes. Wasn't that fantastic? There's just so much meat in that conversation, so many takeaways and things to consider, not only for how we live our own lives, but how we treat and encourage young people to live theirs. I hope you'll share that episode again with parents of young girls specifically. Hey, a reminder that it's not too late to enter to win a pair of Bluetooth headphones from Jaybird this month, the month of March. All you need to do is email me at beth@shesboldpodcast.com and tell me your 3 favorite episodes of this podcast. You'll get an extra entry if you're subscribed to the She's Bold podcast newsletter, which announces each new episode. You can find a link on how to enter in the show notes and at shesboldpodcast.com/Jaybird. For links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, go to shesboldpodcast.com, and there you will find the show notes for this and all episodes. You can also find those links and show notes in whatever podcast app it is that you use to listen to this. While you're on the shesboldpodcast.com website, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. It's basically a way for you to say, yes, I like what I'm hearing on the She's Bold podcast, and I'm willing to support the show and get some special benefits, that bonus content. You can find out more by going to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group. We've got more than 2,100 women in that fantastic group showing support and giving shout outs to each other. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.